This is Think Out Loud on OPB. I'm Dave Miller. We start today with a proposal to completely overhaul the way a third of Oregon's national forest land is managed. The Malheur, Umatilla, and Wallowa-Whitman National Forests are collectively known as the Blue Mountains. They're being managed under a plan that was developed in 1990, even though these plans are supposed to be revised at least every 15 years. That's because twice now, efforts to revise the Blue Mountains Plan have failed. Last week, the Trump administration unveiled its proposal for a new revision. It would more than triple goals for timber sales and eliminate regulations that protect large trees and sensitive habitat. April Ehrlich covers land and environmental policies for OPB, and she joins us now. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Can you first just give us a sense for the scale of the land managed under this plan?
Yeah, so like you mentioned earlier, this covers 3 national forests. So there's actually 3 separate forest plans, but we just kind of call them the Blue Mountains Forest Plans. And some people might know the Blue Mountains as like a specific mountain range, but this is an entire ecoregion covering all of those national forests. And that equates to about 5 million acres, which is a lot to comprehend. So I did some of the math. It's about the size of New Jersey, which I imagine probably doesn't mean a lot to people here on the West Coast. So I looked at how many Portlands would fit in it, about 54 Portlands. So if you think about how far it takes for you to get from Southeast Portland to Northeast Portland, imagine 54 of those. So it's pretty massive.
Okay, a vast area. For people who haven't been there, can you describe some of the landscapes?
So again, it's really big, so it's really diverse. So anybody who's driven from Portland to Idaho has maybe seen a lot of the sagebrush and the agricultural areas, and they may think, oh, this is very dry. But you veer off of that freeway and you go down some of the forest roads and you just encounter this incredible landscape. It just feels like a hidden secret because a lot of people don't really drive 5 hours from Portland to seek out these sorts of mountains, but you see these huge peaks, these really big rolling grasslands. There's actually the largest intact grassland in the Pacific Northwest here, and I drove through it recently, and it just kind of felt like it went on forever. So we have like wet forests where there are ferns, and then there are some dry areas where there's sagebrush and tons of rivers and lakes. It's just huge and very, very gorgeous.
I mentioned in my intro briefly that this plans were created in 1990. They should have been updated twice since then. They haven't been updated at all. Why not?
Yeah, so it's just been really contentious. The last time a plan was rescinded was in 2019, and they were actually really close to finalizing it. But so many organizations came forward, something like 300 of them came forward and objected to the plans and said, we are not happy with this. And the Forest Service was like, okay, we're not gonna do it this time. We're gonna rescind it and start all over again. So yeah, we've been working on new plans since 1990. And I think the crux of the issue is that there are some really contentious issues at play here and a lot of very passionate people, especially in an area where, this region means a lot to people in Eastern Oregon and people all around the state because of how I mentioned it earlier. There's all these beautiful areas where people can get away from maybe the city or they just want to seek some solace, or maybe they want to hunt elk, which is also a really big part of the economy there. And of course, there's a lot of logging that used to, fuel a lot of the economies there as well. So people are just really passionate about it, and they really need Forest Service, an agency, to come and help kind of piece apart those issues and find some sort of common ground. And so far, it just hasn't been able to do that.
So let's turn to the proposal that was officially unveiled last week. There had been inklings of it in the weeks leading up to it. But what are the biggest changes under this revision proposal?
Yeah, so under the current proposal, it's interesting because I think what stands out to a lot of people is the tripling of logging, right? That's a huge increase. There are some, speculations as to whether the Forest Service can even reach those goals, but that aside, I think another thing that has stood out to people I've been talking to is that it just doesn't really touch on road densities or motorized access. So motorized access is like being able to drive through a forest in an ATV, in a snowmobile, in a car, truck, anything like that. That's really important to some people because they want to be able to drive into those far-reaching areas and collect wood or seek solace. And if you're a logging company, you want to be able to have roads and motorized access so you can do a timber sale. But at the same time, that sort of motorized access can really inhibit elk and deer that migrate through the area. And it can also cause a lot of environmental issues like spreading invasives. So yeah, that's kind of the big issue. And it kind of feels like, from what I'm hearing, like the Forest Service just didn't even touch on it this time because it didn't want to get involved with that conflict. And it's maybe even trying to avoid what happened before, where it just became so contentious that it had to rescind the plan.
What did you hear about this proposal from conservation groups?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, the tripling of logging, I think, is something that environmental groups are especially concerned about. While there are some questions as to whether the Forest Service can meet those timber targets, right? Like the milling infrastructure just isn't really there in the local area. A lot of mills have closed. I don't think there's a single mill in Grant County. And with diesel prices being what they are, timber companies are not likely to want to transfer that wood to a far away mill. And then there, of course, there's the issue of staffing at the Forest Service. So they've lost a lot of staff, and so can they even have the ability to be able to do all that logging? So that aside, I think the thing is that these logging targets are going to set the bar for the next 15 years, and environmental groups are especially concerned about that.
You mentioned elk hunting. What about hunters? What have you heard from hunters?
So hunters share some similar concerns with conservation groups in terms of road density and motorized access. They're concerned about motorized vehicles scaring away elk into other areas, particularly private lands. So that causes a lot of issues for private landowners, right? So elk, they damage crops and just cause a lot of havoc. But also it turns elk hunting into sort of an exclusive activity where you can only really hunt on private land if you know the landowner and they happen to have a tag for hunting elk. So elk hunters, they appreciate some of the logging increases because that would create meadows where elk can forage. But elk also need, in addition to that foraging area, they need a sense of security. And they are not going to get that if there are a lot of cars driving through the area.
What would have to happen before this proposal is finalized?
So right now it is a draft environmental impact statement, right? That's a fancy way of just saying it's a draft plan. And the Forest Service is going to accept public comments for the next 90 days. So September 30th is people's deadline to weigh in and provide their thoughts on what the plans say. And then after that, the Forest Service will issue a final draft environmental impact statement. It might have like a month of, accepting some final objections, and then a leader at the Forest Service will have to sign off on it, and then it'll be finalized.
After decades of failed attempts, though, is there reason to believe that this revision will be finalized?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are really unhappy with the current draft, right? There's the hunters who don't like the road densities or motorized access. There are motorized access groups, people who want to be able to access these lands, and they're unhappy with the fact that it doesn't solidify motorized access in these forests. Then, of course, the environmental groups who are upset with the logging. I think the only people or groups who seem to be really happy with this is the logging industry and some local county officials. But I think even the people who are unhappy with the draft as it stands now, they really just want to get it done. They're tired of this process. We've been working on it for 20 years. I think they just really want to close this chapter of their lives and move on.
April, thanks very much.
Thank you.
April Ehrlich reports on land and environmental policies for OPB.